Okay, so I actually have a quick favor to ask you right off the bat.
Oh, all right. What is it?
Well, wherever you are right now, whether you're commuting to work or like doing the dishes or just relaxing on the couch, I just want you to take a second and point to yourself. Just point to you.
I love this experiment. It's always fascinating to see how people respond to this.
Yeah, because I mean, almost everyone does the exact same thing, right?
Yeah.
You probably just pointed to the center of your chest, or maybe you tap the side of your head.
Right. Yeah, we all do it.
It's just this automatic, deeply ingrained biological reflex.
Yeah.
We locate our self, our
Yeah.
core identity, right there in the meat and bone of our bodies. We assume that the boundary of me stops exactly where our skin meets the air.
Which is, a very logical way to navigate the physical world.
Absolutely. But I want you to try a thought experiment. Imagine just for a second that the thing you just pointed to, that localized, highly specific self, isn't actually just a biological form. Imagine that the foundational existence making up that you is the exact same foundational existence that makes up, like, the furthest star in the Andromeda galaxy,
Right.
or the chair you're sitting on, or literally the very fabric of reality itself.
That's an incredibly disorienting thought.
Right.
It completely shatters the baseline assumptions we have about, well, who we are and what the universe actually is. And what makes this so compelling is that this isn't just some poetic metaphor, or some modern New Age wishful thinking.
No, not at all.
This is actually the central, rigorously argued thesis of a philosophical system that has been challenging, like, the greatest minds for centuries.
And that is exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring the radical philosophy of Śaṅkara.
A true intellectual titan.
Completely. He was an 8th century Indian philosopher who systematized this ancient worldview known as Advaita Vedānta, which, if you translate that, it roughly means radical non-dualism.
Basically the idea that there is no two.
Exactly. No two. So our goal today is to unpack how Śaṅkara used this incredibly tight ancient logic to prove that yourself, which he called the ātman, is mathematically, numerically identical to the universe's ultimate reality, known as Brahman.
And we're going to look at how this framework just completely upends everything modern society assumes about the mind, about the physical world, and, well, our place within it.
So to do this, we are pulling from a pretty massive stack of philosophical translations.
Yeah, we've got quite the reading list today.
We do, but we're primarily relying on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
Yeah.
It just offers this extraordinarily detailed, logically rigorous breakdown of Śaṅkara's life, his metaphysics, and his very specific contemplative methods.
It's a fantastic grounding source. And I think before we get into the heavy metaphysics, we really need to set the stage a bit.
Yeah.
Because Śaṅkara's context it's pretty wild.
Oh, it's fascinating. We're talking about 8th century India here.
Right. And this was a time of intense, almost cutthroat intellectual competition.
Yeah, Śaṅkara was a traveling debater and an exegete, meaning, his job was to interpret these sacred texts and then defend his interpretations in public forums.
And from what historians can piece together, he would travel all across the Indian subcontinent, engaging in these, multi-day, high-stakes philosophical tournaments.
Wait, high stakes? How high are we talking?
Incredibly high. Often, the condition of the debate was that the loser, along with all of their students, by the way, would literally have to abandon their own school of thought and convert to the winner's philosophy.
Oh, wow. So it was literal intellectual combat.
It really was. So Śaṅkara had to build a system of thought that was completely bulletproof. He couldn't just rely on faith or, say, just trust me on this.
Right, because his opponents would just tear him apart.
Exactly. He had to construct logical proofs that would withstand the most punishing scrutiny from rival philosophers, logicians, and Buddhist scholars.
And the most mind-blowing part of his biography, at least to me, is that he supposedly died around the age of 32.
Which is just astonishing.
It is. Yet in that incredibly short lifespan, he managed to leave behind a system of thought that easily rivals our most complex modern theories of mind. Things we talk about today like panpsychism and cosmopsychism.
Yeah, his output was unbelievable. And while his ideas were deeply rooted in ancient texts called the Upanishads, we're going to focus today purely on the rational arguments he used.
Right. We want to really look at the mechanics of his logic.
I think that's the best approach, because he was trying to prove a premise that sounds honestly impossible to modern ears. That existence is, at its core, one only without a second.
No division. No separation.
Pure, undifferentiated existence.
Okay, so let's start trying to break that down. One only without a second. Because, the moment I look around the room I'm in right now, I see thousands of things.
Of
I
course.
see a microphone, I see my coffee mug, a window, the trees outside. I see infinite multiplicity. How does he look at a universe filled with billions of distinct objects and claim there was only one thing?
Well, to understand his perspective, we have to completely change how we look at everyday objects. Advaita Vedānta operates on the premise that pure, undifferentiated existence, that Brahman we mentioned, is the only thing that truly has independent reality.
Okay.
Everything we see around us, all those objects he just listed, are just compounded permutations. According to the ancient physics Śaṅkara worked with, the universe is made of primary elements: space, air, fire, water, earth.
Right, the classic elements.
But his argument is that those elements aren't the bottom layer of reality. They're resting on and entirely dependent upon pure existence.
I'm struggling a bit to visualize that. How can an object be a permutation of something else and not have its own independent reality?
So Śaṅkara uses a canonical illustration for this, and it involves a really simple clay pot.
Okay, a clay pot.
He establishes two criteria for determining what is real: dependence and persistence. So imagine you're a potter. You have a lump of clay. You take that lump, put it on your wheel, spin it, and shape it into a pot. You fire it in a kiln. Now you have a pot.
Makes sense.
Later, you get tired of the pot, so you crush it down, mix it with water, and mold it into a flat plate.
Okay, I'm tracking with you. I've seen the clay change from a lump to a pot to a plate.
I think the forms are constantly changing, and the previous forms are destroyed. The lump is destroyed to make the pot is destroyed to make the plate. But what persists through every single one of those changes, what is the continuous thread?
Well, the material. The clay itself is always there.
Yes. Because the clay persists while the forms are transient, Śaṅkara argues that the clay is ontologically more real than the pot or the plate.
Oh, I see.
Think about the dependence criterion. The pot relies entirely on the clay to exist. If you remove the clay, the pot vanishes instantly. But if you remove the pot form by, say, smashing it, the clay doesn't vanish.
Right, you just have broken clay.
Exactly. You can have clay without a pot, but you cannot have a pot without clay. Therefore, the pot's form has no objective independent existence apart from the clay. The potness is literally just a temporary shape the clay happens to be taking.
Okay, I hear the logic, but I have to push back here. From an everyday practical perspective, this sounds a little, well, absurd.
How so?
Let's say I'm holding that heavy fired clay pot and I drop it on my foot.
Ouch.
Right. The pain I feel is incredibly real. My toe swells up. I might have to go to the doctor. How can anyone look at my bruised foot and say the pot form is less real than the clay? My foot definitely experienced a pot. It didn't experience some abstract philosophical concept of clay.
Śaṅkara would actually not deny your pain for a second. He's very clear that empirical experience, like the pain of a stubbed toe or the heaviness of the object, is a completely valid experience in everyday life.
Well, that's a relief.
But he would use your dropped pot to introduce a much deeper metaphysical concept, the infinite reduction. He would challenge you to look really closely at that pot that just hit your foot and try to isolate its actual existence. Like, where exactly does the pot's reality live?
I would say it lives in the heavy, solid form that just crushed my toe.
But if you try to isolate the existence of an object within its form, Śaṅkara argues you just fall into an endless regress. Let's switch from the pot to something with a bit more structure, like a cotton shirt. You hold up a shirt and say, this shirt exists, it is real.
Fair enough. I can touch it, I can wear it, I can fold it.
But what is the shirt? The shirt is just a specific form made out of cloth. If you pull the cloth apart, the shirt disappears. So the existence doesn't really belong to the shirt. The existence belongs to the cloth. The shirt is just borrowing its reality from the cloth.
Okay, I follow that. The cloth is the underlying material, just like the clay.
But now look at the cloth. Does the cloth have independent reality?
No, because it's made of threads.
Exactly. The cloth is just a form made of woven threads. If you unweave the threads, the cloth ceases to exist. So the cloth was just borrowing its existence from the threads. Now look at the threads. They're just fibers twisted together. Pull the fibers apart, the thread is gone. The thread was borrowing its existence from the fibers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I assume we can just keep going down. Like the fibers are made of chemical molecules, and the molecules are made of atoms.
Right, and the atoms are made of protons and electrons.
Keep going. The protons are made of quarks.
And the quarks dissolve into quantum probability fields. Whenever you look for the ultimate substance of a physical form, it just dissolves into another subtler form. You never, ever hit a solid bottom of physical existence.
That is a wow.
There is no fundamental, irreducible physical building block that you can point to and say, aha, here is the independent reality of the universe.
That is a staggering way to look at reality.
Yeah.
You're saying that every single object I interact with is just a temporary configuration of something smaller, which is a temporary configuration of something even smaller, infinitely down.
Yes. And because of this infinite reduction, Śaṅkara concludes that forms, meaning all objects in the physical universe, are just temporary names. He uses the Sanskrit terms nama, meaning name, and rupa, meaning form.
Nama and rupa.
A shirt is just a name and a form. A pot is just a name and a form. A tree, a mountain, a planet, they are all just temporary names and forms. They possess zero independent existence.
So what are they borrowing their existence from, ultimately?
They are entirely borrowing their existence from the ultimate non-dual ground. They are borrowing it from Brahman.
So tying this back to that one only, without a second idea, the universe isn't a collection of billions of distinct things. It is one single, continuous existence Brahman that is currently folding itself into billions of temporary shapes.
Exactly.
Kind of like how the ocean isn't made of millions of separate waves. The wave isn't a permanent object. It's just what the water happens to be doing in that specific location for a few seconds.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The form of the wave is transient. It rises and it falls. But the water itself, the existence underlying the wave, is completely continuous. The water doesn't care if it's shaped like a cresting wave, a gentle ripple, or a totally flat, calm surface. Its waterness remains undisturbed.
That makes a lot of sense.
Śaṅkara argues that Brahman is the water, and every physical object in the universe is a wave.
But, okay, this raises a massive red flag for me.
Let's hear it.
If all physical objects infinitely reduce into this formless Brahman, what exactly is this physical universe I'm experiencing right now? Is my life, my house, my car, the coffee I'm drinking? Is it all just a hallucination? Am I just walking through a mirage?
This was actually the exact attack leveled against Śaṅkara by his philosophical rivals in India. They were furious with this concept. They branded him a Mayavadin, which was, at the time, a highly pejorative term.
Ātman, what does that mean?
Essentially, they were calling him an illusionist, someone who argues the world is a complete fake, a deceptive phantom. But the Stanford Encyclopedia source points out that calling him a Mayavadin is a massive misconception of his actual ontology.
I'm really curious how he defends against that, because if you say my house has no independent existence, it really sounds like you're saying my house is an illusion.
Well, Śaṅkara makes a very careful distinction here. He doesn't think the world is completely non-existent. To explain absolute non-existence, he uses examples of logical impossibilities. He talks about, like, a square circle, or the horn of a hare, or the son of a barren woman.
Right. Those things cannot exist by definition. You can't even picture a square circle in your mind. The geometry literally contradicts itself.
Yes, a square circle is absolutely unreal. It has zero objective presence. But the physical world is clearly not like a square circle. You can picture your house. You can walk into it. You can feel the heat of the coffee in your mug.
Yeah, the world has an undeniable objective appearance. We're all interacting with it.
Exactly. So Śaṅkara proposes a third ontological category, a third space of reality. He says the universe is an objective appearance, but it is less than real.
Less than real. What does that actually mean in practice?
He uses a specific term for this, anirvakaniya, which translates to indeterminable or inexpressible. It's a brilliant philosophical maneuver. He argues that you cannot say the universe absolutely exists in a permanent, independent sense, because we just proved with the infinite reduction that it's constantly changing and totally dependent. It has no bottom.
But you also can't say it doesn't exist because I'm literally sitting in a chair right now.
Precisely. So because you cannot categorize it as absolutely real and you cannot categorize it as absolutely unreal, it exists in this middle space. It is indeterminable. It's a temporary dependent appearance.
I am trying to figure out how to live with that information, honestly. How do I balance knowing the world is indeterminable with the fact that I still have to pay a mortgage on an indeterminable house?
Śaṅkara resolves this tension with a framework we call the two-tiered reality. He suggests we have to evaluate our experience from two completely different standpoints, and we shouldn't mix them up.
Okay, what are the tiers?
Tier 1 is empirical reality. This is the transactional world. This is where we live, where we pay taxes, where we build houses, and where pots fall on our feet.
So he isn't suggesting I could just step out into traffic because the cars are indeterminable.
Absolutely not. Within the empirical tier, the rules of the empirical tier apply perfectly. Causation is real here. Gravity works. Ethics matter. If you step in front of an empirical car your empirical body will be severely injured. Sakkara lived in this tier. He walked thousands of miles across India. He ate, he drank, he respected Tier 1.
Okay, that is a huge relief. But what is Tier 2 then?
Tier 2 is ultimate reality. This is the absolute non-dual standpoint where only Brahman exists. And the catch is this. From the ultimate standpoint, the empirical world collapses. When viewed from Tier 2, Tier 1 loses its independent reality entirely.
I'm having a really hard time holding both of those truths in my head at the same time. How can something be so completely real in one tier and entirely collapse in another?
The most profound way Śaṅkara illustrates this is through his analogy of the dreamer and the dream. I want you to think deeply about the mechanics of what happens when you go to sleep tonight and have a highly vivid dream.
Okay.
Let's say you dream that you are walking through a bustling ancient marketplace. You see a merchant selling a clay pot. You pick up the dream pot and it slips. You drop it on your dream foot.
Oh, I see where this is going. While I'm inside the dream, that dream pot is entirely real to me. If it hits my dream foot, my dream brain is going to register pain. I'll hop around holding my foot. I will probably yell at the merchant.
Yes. From the standpoint of the dream, which we can call the empirical reality of the sleeping state, the world is well-founded. The physics of the dream feel completely solid. But then your alarm clock goes off. You wake up. You are lying in your bed, staring at the ceiling. The moment you transition to the waking state, what happens to the marketplace, the merchant, the pot, and the pain in your foot?
They all instantly vanish. I realized they had no physical substance whatsoever.
They were entirely dependent on your waking mind. They were just temporary forms projected by your consciousness. Now consider this. What if, while you were still inside the dream, you decided to investigate the true nature of reality?
Okay, so I'm a dream scientist.
Right. You pick up the dream pot and you try to find its ultimate cause. You smash it into a million dream pieces. You put those pieces under a dream microscope. Will you ever find the true cause of the dream pot by examining its physical pieces?
No. I could spend 1,000 years analyzing the dream pot, but I will never find its origin inside the dream. Because the cause isn't physical. The cause is my waking mind, which exists totally outside the simulation of the dream. To find the truth, I literally have to wake up to the next tier of reality.
That is the genius of Śaṅkara's two-tiered reality. The empirical world, our everyday waking life, is exactly like that dream. It operates with its own internal logic, just like the dream marketplace did. It feels incredibly solid while we're in it. But just as the dream eventually resolves into the waking mind, this entire physical universe resolves into Tier 2. It resolves into Brahman.
That makes perfect sense on a micro level. Like, my nightly dream is projected by my individual brain.
But if our entire physical waking universe is also a dream, who or what is projecting it? I'm clearly not dreaming up the entire cosmos. There are galaxies out there I don't even know about. Who is the dreamer of Tier 1?
This brings us to a crucial concept in Advaita Vedānta called Ishvara. You can think of Ishvara as roughly equivalent to a cosmic mind, or a supreme creator deity from the empirical standpoint. Śaṅkara posits that the entire physical universe is manifested by Ishvara. The universe is Ishvara's effortless projection. It unfolds through a kind of cosmic memory or divine imagination.
Wait, let me be sure I'm really grasping this. Are you saying the universe only exists because this cosmic mind is actively thinking about it? Like, it is knowing the universe into existence?
That is exactly the premise. The universe's ongoing manifestation is concurrent with Ishvara's perception of it. The physical world doesn't have an independent clockwork existence that just ticks along on its own. It exists because the cosmic mind is currently projecting and sustaining the form.
I am fascinated by this because this ancient 8th century concept sounds suspiciously identical to how modern computer scientists describe top-down rendering in massive multiplayer video games.
Oh, I'm not much of a gamer, so you'll have to walk me through how that applies here.
Okay, think about a massive open-world game. Something with sprawling continents, millions of trees, mountain ranges, changing weather, all that. A naive assumption is that when you turn on the game, your computer loads the entire planet into its memory, and every single tree is existing simultaneously.
Yeah.
But computers don't have the processing power for that.
So how do they actually generate the world?
They use top-down rendering. The master server contains all the basic rules in the code, but it only actually generates the physical environment. It only draws the trees and the mountains on the screen when a player is actively looking at them. The server computes the environment in real time based on observation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the digital forest only pops into physical existence on your monitor because the server knows you are there and need to interact with it.
So the digital world is entirely dependent on the server's ongoing processing.
Completely. If you pull the plug on the server, if the server stops knowing the environment, the entire digital universe instantly vanishes. It leaves no trace. It has zero independent physical reality. Its entire existence is just data flowing through the mind of the server.
That is a staggering modern translation of Yushvara. In Śaṅkara's view, the physical universe functions beautifully through that digital analogy. It's real enough for us to interact with. The rules of the game matter while you're playing it, but its foundational existence is entirely dependent on the master server, Ushvara, projecting it. The physical world is just data in the cosmic mind.
But this sets up a deeply frustrating problem for us. If the physical world is like a video game rendering or a cosmic dream, and all physical forms are just temporary borrowed existence, how can we ever hope to experience the ultimate reality?
It's a profound dilemma.
Right. If I want to find the master server, I can't find it by chopping down the digital trees. I can't find the truth by smashing the dream pod. So where do I look?
This is where Śaṅkara makes his most radical defining pivot. He tells his students that we will never find the ultimate reality by looking outward. You cannot study the objects of the universe to find the ground of the universe, because every object is just another transient form.
So what's the alternative?
If we want to find the truth, we must stop looking at the objects being illuminated, and we must turn our attention to the light doing the illuminating. We have to dive into the philosophy of mind.
Which means we're moving from external metaphysics to our internal experience. We have to redefine what consciousness actually is.
We do, because Śaṅkara makes a claim here that is breathtaking in its audacity. He argues that Brahman, this infinite non-dual existence that grounds the entire cosmos, isn't some distant abstract soup floating out in deep space. He argues that Brahman is numerically identical to your own pure consciousness.
Wait, really?
Yes. The existence of the universe is the exact same thing as the awareness looking out through your eyes right now.
And I need to pause here because we have to be incredibly careful with how we define consciousness. When I use that word in daily life, I'm usually referring to a chaotic mess. My consciousness feels like my anxiety about an upcoming deadline, my memories of a conversation I had yesterday, the song currently stuck in my head, and my overall feeling of being a specific person named me.
Right.
If that chaotic mess is identical to the foundation of the universe is in serious trouble.
Śaṅkara would entirely agree with your concern. The confusion you're describing is the exact confusion he spent his life trying to dismantle. He makes an exceptionally sharp, uncompromising distinction between the mind and consciousness.
Okay, what's the distinction?
In his framework, everything you just described, your intellect, your sensory processing, your memories, your emotional reactions, and even your ego, your foundational sense of being individual I, all of that falls under the category of the mind.
So if the mind is doing all the thinking, feeling, and remembering, what is left for consciousness to do? What actually is it?
Śaṅkara introduces the concept of the witnessing consciousness, or the sākṣin. Consciousness in the system does not think. It does not feel. It does not analyze. It is a passive, non-intentional, luminous background. Its only function is to illumine the activities of the mind.
So it's just pure awareness?
Exactly. It's the raw capacity to be aware. It is the light that allows you to know that you are having a thought.
Oh, I see. It's like the difference between a movie and a projector screen. The mind is the movie. It's full of drama, action, tragedy, and comedy. It's constantly changing scenes. But consciousness is just a pure white screen behind the film. The screen doesn't laugh during a comedy, and it doesn't cry during a tragedy. It just silently allows the movie to be displayed.
That is an excellent way to visualize it. The witnessing consciousness is entirely unaffected by the mental states it illuminates. However, Śaṅkara knows that a metaphor isn't enough to win a philosophical debate. He has to prove logically that this witnessing consciousness is a constant, unchanging reality, separate from the shifting states of the mind.
And how does he do that?
He accomplishes this through a rigorous analysis of our three states of experience: waking, dreaming, and deep, dreamless sleep.
Deep sleep. Okay, this is where Śaṅkara's logic gets really counterintuitive for a modern listener. Because if you ask a neuroscientist or a modern philosopher of physicalism, they'll generally argue that consciousness requires an object. You have to be conscious of something.
Right, that's the standard view.
If your brain isn't processing an object, if you aren't thinking or looking at a tree or having a dream, your consciousness basically powers down, which is why we describe deep, dreamless sleep as being unconscious. We think we literally turn off.
That is the standard materialist view. No object, no consciousness. But Śaṅkara violently rejects this premise. He argues that your pure witnessing consciousness never turns off. It is wide awake, burning brightly 100% of the time, even in the absolute dead of night during dreamless sleep.
I am going to need a very strong argument to believe that. If my consciousness is perfectly awake during deep sleep, why don't I remember it? Why do I experience it as a gap in my timeline? I lie down, there's a block of nothingness, and then I wake up. Why does it feel like nothing?
To explain this phenomenon, Śaṅkara uses a brilliant analogy. Imagine you walk into a windowless room deep underground. The door shuts behind you. There is absolutely no light in this room. It is pitch black. You stand in the center of the room and you open your eyes as wide as you can. Are you blind?
No. Assuming my eyes are healthy, I'm not blind. My optic nerves are working perfectly.
Exactly. Your capacity to see is fully active and functioning perfectly. So why do you see nothing?
Because there's nothing for the capacity to interact with. There's no light bouncing off any objects. The room is entirely empty.
Śaṅkara says this is the exact mechanics of deep sleep. Your pure witnessing consciousness, your capacity to be aware, is wide awake, shining brightly. But what has happened? The mind has temporarily shut down to rest. There are no thoughts, there are no dreams, there isn't even an active ego or sense of me. The room of the mind is entirely empty.
So consciousness has no objects to illumine.
Yes. You experience the darkness not because your light is broken, but because the room is empty. The very fact that you can wake up and remember that there was nothing proves that a witness was present to experience the nothingness. If your consciousness actually turned off, you wouldn't even have the memory of a gap.
Wow. Let me just think about that for a second. So when I wake up and say, I slept deeply and didn't dream, I'm not reporting an absence of consciousness. I'm actually using my consciousness to report on the absence of objects.
That is exactly it.
Okay, I'm tracking with the pitch black room analogy. But logically, this opens up a very strange paradox.
Let's hear it.
If consciousness in deep sleep doesn't have an object to look at, and it doesn't even have a mind or an ego to say, I am experiencing this, how does consciousness know it's there? If it has nothing to bounce off of, doesn't it need some kind of secondary thought to pop up and register its own existence? Doesn't it need a mental ping that says, hey, I'm currently conscious?
You have just hit upon one of the most intense philosophical battlegrounds in ancient India. This exact question was brought against Śaṅkara by rival schools, most notably the Nyaya school of logic.
Oh, really?
Yes. They championed what we would call today a higher-order theory of consciousness. They argued precisely what you just suggested. You need a second cognitive event to witness the first one.
I mean, that feels intuitive. If I see an apple, the raw data hits my brain. But to know I am seeing the apple, I need a secondary mental process to look at the first process and say, I am registering an apple. Like a security camera watching the feed of another security camera.
It sounds totally plausible until Śaṅkara dismantles it. His rebuttal is devastating. He asks the Nyaya philosophers, if you need a second thought to witness the first thought, how do you know the second thought occurred? By your own logic, you would need a third thought to witness the second, and a fourth to witness the third, and a 5 millionth thought to witness the previous one.
Oh, I see. You just fall into an infinite loop.
A vicious infinite regress. Śaṅkara points out that if this higher-order theory were true, you could never actually know anything in real time. Your brain would be infinitely paralyzed, endlessly generating new thoughts just to catch up with the awareness of the previous thought. The chain of knowing must stop somewhere. It needs a foundation.
That makes perfect logical sense. The security cameras can't just watch each other forever. Someone eventually has to just look at a monitor. So how did other philosophers try to solve it?
Certain Buddhist philosophers offered a different solution. They tried to avoid the infinite regress by arguing for a concept called reflexivity. They posited that a thought is like a lamp. It can illuminate its object like the apple, and it can simultaneously illuminate itself. A single cognitive event does double duty.
Oh, okay. A candle lights up the room, but the flame also makes itself visible. That seems like a pretty neat solution.
Śaṅkara rejects this too, using a principle he calls the reflexivity fallacy. He argues that an entity, no matter how powerful, cannot operate upon itself. He uses several physical examples. A fire, despite being incredibly hot, cannot burn itself. A knife, no matter how razor-sharp the blade is, cannot cut itself. An acrobat, no matter how skilled, cannot stand on their own shoulders. Therefore, a thought, which is just a transient object of the mind, cannot objectify itself. The subject cannot be the object of its own action.
So if you don't need a second thought to prove you're conscious, and a thought cannot illuminate itself, What is the final solution? How does consciousness know it exists?
Śaṅkara arrives at a really profound conclusion. He declares that witnessing consciousness is uniquely self-illuminating, or svaprakasha. It is the only reality in the universe that requires absolutely no second thing to prove its existence. It is intrinsically immediate.
Self-eliminating, meaning its very nature is to shine.
Yes, you can never turn around and look at your own consciousness as an object because it is the very thing doing the looking. But its existence is self-evident. You cannot deny you are conscious because the very act of trying to formulate the thought, am I conscious, requires consciousness to illumine the doubt.
It's like trying to bite your own teeth. You will never be able to do it because the teeth are the instrument of biting. But you absolutely know without a shadow of a doubt that your teeth are there.
Exactly. Consciousness is the undeniable, irreducible, self-illuminating ground of all your experience. And because it is formless, continuous, and irreducible, Śaṅkara connects the macro to the micro. He concludes that this internal witnessing consciousness, this pristine light inside you, is numerically identical to the external Brahman. The witness peering out of your eyes is the exact same fundamental reality that sustains the galaxies.
Okay, my mind is thoroughly blown by the scale of that. But if I accept that premise, it brings us to a massive glaring contradiction.
Let's unpack it.
If my true foundational nature is this pure, infinite, passive, unbothered witnessing consciousness, why did I get road rage this morning?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Why do I walk around feeling like a highly limited, highly stressed out individual trapped in a fragile meat suit? Why do I worry about my bank account? If I am fundamentally the serene, unbroken universe, how does the universe get so incredibly stressed out?
This contradiction is the crux of the human condition in Advaita Vedānta. How does the infinite get trapped in the finite? How does the unbobbed screen get wrapped up in the drama of the movie? To explain this, Śaṅkara introduces a highly sophisticated theory of the mind, focusing heavily on the subtle material that makes up our cognitive faculties.
Wait, subtle material? He viewed the mind as a physical substance.
Yes, though not physical in the gross sense of brain tissue. In this framework, the mind, the antahkarana, is comprised of the subtlest, finest material in the universe. This material is dominated by a quality called sattva. Sattva is characterized by extreme lucidity, transparency, and clarity. Because it is so pristine and clear, the mind possesses a unique capability. It acts literally like a mirror.
And what is this highly polished mirror reflecting?
It is positioned perfectly to reflect the pure light of the witnessing consciousness. This dynamic is known as the reflection theory, or pratibimba. Pure, non-dual consciousness shines its light, and the highly refined matter of the intellect catches that reflection. When this happens, a semblance or a localized illusion of consciousness is generated inside the mind.
Okay.
And when the mind becomes bathed in this reflected light, something terrible and wonderful occurs. The mind suddenly believes that it is inherently conscious.
Oh, wow. The intellect starts stealing the credit.
Precisely. This reflection generates the I-maker, known in Sanskrit as the ahakara, the ego. The mind, which is actually just a complex biological machine processing sensory data and memories, suddenly feels alive. It feels sentient. And it immediately claims ownership over everything it does. It says, I am thinking this thought, I am feeling this anger, I am performing this action.
It's like the moon. The moon is just a dead rock floating in space. It produces absolutely no light of its own. But because it perfectly reflects the sun, if the moon had an ego, it might look down at the earth and say, look at how brightly I am shining tonight. Look at the light I am creating. It takes credit for a brilliance that is just bouncing off it.
That is a beautiful way to express it. The ego is the moon taking credit for the sun. Now, to make sure his students don't take the mirror analogy too literally, because consciousness doesn't actually travel through space to bounce off a surface, Śaṅkara provides a secondary spatial analogy. This is called the limitation theory, or avidyā.
I'm intrigued. Walk me through the limitation idea.
Imagine an empty room. Now, bring a large clay pot into the middle of the room. That pot naturally encloses a little specific volume of space, correct? We might call the space inside the ceramic walls pot space to distinguish it from the general room space around it.
Sure. The pot has created a boundary.
But consider the actual nature of the space. If you pick up the pot and carry it to the other side of the room, do you actually pick up a chunk of space and move it?
No. The pot just moves through the space. The space itself remains totally stationary and unaffected.
Exactly. And if you take a hammer and smash the pot into pieces, does the pot space shatter? Does it spill out onto the floor?
No. The space was never actually trapped. It was always continuous with the rest of the room. The pot just created an artificial, temporary boundary that fooled the eye.
Yes. Space is indivisible. Śaṅkara argues that our biological bodies and our subtle minds are exactly like those clay pots. They act as conditioning adjuncts. Our bodies move around the planet, and they seem to carve out a little localized slice of universal consciousness. We point to our chests and say, this is my consciousness, this is my soul. We feel isolated.
But it's an illusion.
It is an optical illusion. Consciousness doesn't move. It isn't divided into billions of separate pieces. Our biological pots are just moving through the undivided expanse of Brahman.
These analogies are really stacking up in a way that makes the problem painfully clear. If I combine the mirror and the pot, let's say I'm looking at a mirror, but this mirror has a huge jagged scratch right down the middle of the glass.
Okay.
When I look into it, the reflection of my face looks scarred. If I am under the delusion that I actually am the reflection, I'm going to panic. I will think my actual physical face is ruined. I will suffer immense emotional pain over a blemish that only exists on the medium, the mirror, while the true prototype, my actual face, is perfectly fine.
You have just perfectly described the mechanics of human suffering according to Śaṅkara. You are suffering over the conditions of the mind and body because you have fundamentally identified with the reflection. You think you are the scratched mirror. This catastrophic mistake in identity is what Śaṅkara calls superimposition, or ātman.
Superimposition, laying the qualities of one thing over the reality of another.
Yes. Due to a fundamental, beginningless ignorance, which he calls avidyā, we mutually superimpose the subject and the object. We take the limitations, the pain, the sickness, and the mortality of the body and mind, and we superimpose them onto pure, pristine consciousness. We say, I am sick, or I'm getting old, or I am depressed. At the exact same time, we take the sentience and reality of consciousness, and we superimpose it onto the inert body and mind. We say, this body is me.
We get our wires completely crossed. We tie the infinite to the finite.
And this tangled superimposition is the root of all fear, desire, and suffering. To hammer this home, Śaṅkara uses his most famous and visceral analogy, the rope mistaken for a snake. Imagine you are walking down a rural path at twilight. The light is dim. You look down, and right in the middle of the path, you see a coiled, venomous snake. Instantly, your body reacts. Your heart rate spikes, adrenaline floods your system, you break out in a cold sweat, you feel sheer terror. You might run away screaming or pick up a stick to strike it.
The physiological reaction is 100% real. The terror is real.
The terror is absolutely real. But then, a friend comes walking the path carrying a bright lantern. The light shines onto the path, and you clearly see that it is not a snake at all. It is just a coiled piece of discarded rope.
Oh, wow.
The snake never existed. It had zero objective reality. It was entirely a projection of your mind, superimposed onto the reality of the rope. Yet the fear you felt and the suffering you endured was entirely genuine as long as the illusion held.
The snake covers the rope. Ignorance covers our true nature. And the suffering we feel about our lives is real until the light of knowledge comes on.
You have grasped it perfectly. The mind, the ego, the limitations of the body, these are the snake. Pure, non-dual consciousness is the rope.
So this leaves us hanging on the ultimate cliffhanger. If my entire sense of identity, my entire life as an individual, is built on a fundamental case of mistaken identity, how do I fix it? How do I stop seeing the snake and realize it's a rope? What is the practical method for achieving liberation in this system? Do I meditate? Do I chant? Do I retreat to a cave?
This is where Śaṅkara is going to deeply frustrate a lot of people who love a good spiritual checklist or a self-improvement regimen. Because his most counterintuitive, radical claim is that you cannot do anything to achieve liberation.
Wait, I can't do anything. That goes against almost every religious and spiritual tradition on earth. They all have paths, practices, commandments, 8 sold steps.
He argues forcefully that action, physical meditation, and religious rituals are essentially useless for actually attaining ultimate reality, which is called mokkam.
Why? That seems incredibly pessimistic. If action is useless, what is the point of trying?
You have to analyze the very nature of what an action is. Think about what any action requires. Action always implies a distance between where you currently are and a goal you want to achieve in the future. If you want to build a house, there is a physical and temporal distance between the empty plot of land today and the finished home a year from now. Action requires an agent, an ego, doing the work. It requires a method or instrument tools to build, and it requires a destination.
Right. It relies on cause and effect moving through time.
But here's the massive philosophical paradox. You already are a non-dual Brahman. You are already the ultimate infinite reality. You cannot walk toward a destination you are currently standing on. Any action you take to become enlightened or to reach the universe requires you to act from the perspective of an ego. Therefore, the harder you try to grasp it through effort, the more you reaffirm the delusion that you are currently a separate, limited individual who lacks something.
You're trying to accomplish something that is already an accomplished fact. It is like a dog chasing its own tail, completely unaware that the tail is already attached to its body.
Exactly. The Advaita tradition illustrates this paradox with a highly famous teaching narrative called the 10th man story.
I've heard variations of this, but please walk me through the Advaita version.
Imagine 10 young students are traveling together on a long journey. They come to a wide, fast-moving, incredibly dangerous river. They have no boat, so they must swim across. The current is fierce, and they struggle, but eventually they all drag themselves onto the far bank, exhausted. The leader of the group, wanting to make sure everyone survived the crossing, lines the students up and counts them. He points his finger at each student. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He only counts 9.
Oh no. Panic sets in.
Absolute panic. He counts again, 1 through 9. The students realize one of their friends has drowned in the river. They collapse on the riverbank, weeping uncontrollably, mourning the tragic death of the lost 10th child. They sit there for hours in total despair. Eventually, an older, wise traveler walks past. He sees the weeping children and asks what happened. The leader tearfully explains that 10 of them entered the river, but only 9 came out.
And the traveler realizes what happened.
Yes. The traveler looks at the group. He silently counts them. He immediately sees the problem. The leader counted everyone else, but he forgot to point the finger at himself.
He was so hyper-focused on looking outward at the objects, he completely ignored the subject doing the looking.
Precisely. So the wise traveler steps forward, looks directly at the leader, points a finger at him, and simply says, "You are the 10th." Instantly, the illusion breaks, the grief vanishes, the suffering ends.
That is a phenomenal story.
Yeah.
Because it perfectly illustrates the limits of action.
Yes, look at the mechanics of the resolution. The leader didn't have to do anything to revive the 10th person. He didn't have to perform CPR. He didn't have to dive back into the dangerous river to search. He didn't have to chant a mantra. The 10th person was never actually lost. The 10th person was an already accomplished fact. All that was required was a cognitive shift. Ignorance was removed by a statement of truth from an outside source, and the reality that was always present was suddenly recognized.
Okay, I hear the beauty in that story, but I have a major practical pushback here.
Go ahead.
If I am already the universe, if I'm already the 10th man, and I don't have to do anything to achieve liberation, shouldn't I just quit my job? Shouldn't I just sit on my couch, eat junk food, and stop trying to be a good person? If action is useless for enlightenment, this philosophy sounds like a recipe for total apathy and societal collapse. Why bother being ethical?
Śaṅkara anticipated this exact critique, and it is a crucial misunderstanding of his work. This is where we have to nuance his stance on action, particularly regarding karma yoga, which is the yoga of action and duty. While it is strictly true that action cannot cause or produce liberation, Śaṅkara does not advocate for nihilism or sitting on the couch. In fact, he places a massive prerequisite emphasis on moral virtues, ethical behavior, and acting for the good of the world.
But logically, if being a good person doesn't lead to liberation, why do it?
Because action prepares the instrument. Think back to our mirror analogy. If your mind is a mirror designed to reflect the pure light of consciousness, what happens if that mirror is covered in a thick layer of mud, grime, and scratches?
The reflection will be totally distorted. You won't be able to see the light clearly.
The mud and grime are our selfish desires, our anxieties, our anger, our greed, and our attachments. As long as your mind is highly agitated and obscured by these impurities, it cannot properly grasp the subtle truth of non-duality. You could have a wise traveler walk up to you and say, "You are the 10th man. You are the universe." But your muddy mind will just reject it or turn it into an intellectual concept or get distracted by what's for dinner.
So karma yoga acting ethically is essentially the Windex for the mirror.
Yes. Karma yoga is about acting altruistically. It involves doing your daily duties, acting compassionately, and most importantly, surrendering the fruits of your actions. You do the right thing not because you want a reward, not because you want a promotion, not even because you want to get enlightened. You do it simply because it is the right action in that moment. Acting without selfish desire purifies the antakaran, the inner mind. It makes the mirror clean, stable, and incredibly lucid.
Let me make sure I have this straight. Action prepares the soil, but knowledge is the seed that actually sprouts. Cleaning the mirror doesn't create the reflection, but it is necessary to see the reflection that is already there.
That is the perfect summary of his ambivalence toward action. You need a pure mind, but purity alone isn't the final step.
So if meditation, ethical action, and a clean mirror only prepare the ground, what actually triggers the awakening? What represents the traveler saying, "You are the 10th"? For Śaṅkara, the final push isn't a mystical trance or a psychedelic vision. It is purely linguistic and epistemic. It is a shift in knowledge triggered by language.
This is perhaps the most unique aspect of his entire methodology. Śaṅkara developed highly specific, rigorous methods for examining philosophical texts and using language to trigger that realization in his students. He essentially uses language to deconstruct language. The first primary method is called Advaita and Vedānta, which translates to continuity and discontinuity.
We touched on this earlier with the deep sleep example, right?
Yeah.
Isolating what persists from what doesn't.
Yes, but applying it systematically to every aspect of your life. The student is taught to logically dissect their experience. You look at your emotions. Anger arises and passes away. It is discontinuous. The witness remains. It is continuous. You look at your body. It ages, it changes, cells die and are replaced. Discontinuous. The witness remains. You logically train your intellect to stop identifying with the variables and to anchor entirely in the constant.
That sounds like a powerful preparatory practice. But what about the more direct explosive triggers, the phrases that are supposed to wake you up?
That brings us to a method called lakhan, or secondary implication. This method revolves around the most famous Upanishadic equation, the core statement of the texts. Tattvam asi.
You are that.
You are that. It is a profound statement. But Śaṅkara points out that, grammatically speaking, this statement is an utter contradiction. If taken literally, it makes no sense. How can the highly localized, limited individual sitting in a room, you, be identical with the vast, infinite, omniscient cause of the universe, that? They have completely opposing qualities.
Right. It would be like pointing to a spark and saying, this spark is a raging forest fire.
No.
They share heat, but their scale and properties are completely different. To resolve the paradox, the student has to use lakhan. They have to mentally strip away the contradictory parts of the words to find the shared essence.
Śaṅkara uses a brilliant, relatable story to explain how we do this naturally in everyday life. It is called the Devadatta analogy. Devadatta is just a common Sanskrit placeholder name, like saying John Doe.
Walk me through the Devadatta scenario.
Imagine you knew someone named Devadatta when you were both young children. You lived in a specific rural village, and it was 20 years ago. You have clear memories of him as a young boy in that specific place. Now, decades later, you are an adult and you travel to a massive, bustling city on the other side of the country. You walk into a crowded marketplace and you make eye contact with a middle-aged man. Instantly, a flash of recognition hits you. You point at him and say, "This is that Devadatta."
Okay, a classic reunion. You recognize your old friend.
But Śaṅkara asks you to analyze the grammar and logic of your realization. This person, an older man wearing different clothes, standing in a massive city, existing in the present moment, cannot physically be identical to that person, a young boy in a rural village 20 years ago. The time is different. The location is different. The physical body has completely regenerated its cells. Everything about the physical presentation is discontinuous.
So how do you actually recognize him?
By using lakhan. Without even thinking about it, your mind mentally strips away the localized limitations of time, place, and age. You ignore the where and the when. You drop the contradictory adjectives, and you focus entirely on the continuous underlying essence, the specific consciousness of the person himself.
You find the common denominator that survived the passage of 20 years.
Exactly. Śaṅkara says the student must do the exact same grammatical operation with the phrase, "You are that." You must strip away the limited, localized mind-body aspects of you, your name, your age, your personal history. And you must strip away the external distance and cosmic qualities of that, the vastness of the galaxies, the concept of a creator. When you drop the conflicting adjectives from both sides, what remains in both is pure, non-dual existence consciousness. The core of the individual and the core of the universe perfectly overlap.
That is a fascinating mental exercise. But I can imagine that even after doing that, the human brain still craves an object. We still want to paint a mental picture of what Brahman looks like. We want to say it is a bright light, or a feeling deep peace, or a cosmic hum.
And that craving is the final trap. Because Brahman cannot be made an object, any positive description saying it is good or blissful or luminous inevitably turns it into a finite thing inside your mind. You are back to looking at the movie instead of the screen. So Śaṅkara deploys his most rigorous, unyielding method, neti.
Not this, not this.
The practice of absolute negative language. The only way to find the unobjectifiable reality is by systematically stripping away everything it is not. The student is guided to negate every possible limitation. I am not this body, I am not this breath, I am not this hunger, I am not this emotion, I am not these memories, I am not this intellect.
It sounds identical to a sculptor working with a massive, rough block of marble. If a master sculptor is trying to carve a beautiful horse, they don't actually create the horse out of nothing. The perfect form of the horse is conceptually already there, hidden inside the block. The artist's only job is to take their chisel and aggressively remove everything that isn't the horse. They chip away the excess. Neti is the chisel. You chip away the ego, you chip away the body identification, you strip away the history until you hit rock bottom and only the truth remains.
That is an exquisite analogy. The truth is already there, encased in ignorance. And when the marble is finally chipped away and the student's mind is perfectly clean and they hear the words, "You are that," the illusion of the snake vanishes permanently. The reflection realizes it is the prototype. They realize they are the 10th man.
But wait, what actually happens in that moment? This brings up a massive practical question. Does the person just vanish into thin air?
Yeah.
Do they float away on a cloud of non-duality? Does their body drop dead because the illusion is broken?
Not at all. And this is a vital point for modern listeners. Śaṅkara introduces the concept of jivanmukti, which translates to living while liberated. The physical world of Tier 1 does not magically disappear when one attains non-dual knowledge.
So even as an enlightened master, you still have to pay your taxes.
You still pay taxes, you still eat food, you still interact with your family, and you still stub your toe on clay pots. The shift is entirely epistemic. It is a definitive shift in knowledge and perspective, not a physical alteration of the universe. Śaṅkara does not describe liberation as walking around in a permanent, oceanic, mystical trance where you lose the ability to function. In fact, a liberated person acts more efficiently because they are no longer burdened by anxiety. He describes liberation using the analogy of a stage magician.
A stage magician? How does that map onto enlightenment?
Think of a master illusionist performing an incredibly elaborate trick on a stage. They make a building disappear or they saw an assistant in half. The audience is totally fooled. They gasp, they feel tension, they think it is actual magic. They are caught in the illusion. But what about the magician? The magician is not fooled. They still see the illusion. They see the mirrors, the trapdoors, the lighting effects, but they know exactly how the mechanics work. They don't believe the building actually vanished. They experience the appearance, but they are not bound by it.
They see the trick, but they have zero belief in its reality.
Exactly. The liberated person still feels the body, still sees the world of multiplicity, names, and forms. But they are no longer tricked by the superimposition. They have zero egoic identity attached to the mind and body.
The ultimate modern translation for this, which I find incredibly helpful for wrapping my head around Jivanmukti, is the concept of lucid dreaming.
Let me think about that. Yes, it is a near-perfect parallel. Walk through the mechanics of it.
Okay, when you are having a normal non-lucid dream, you are at the mercy of the narrative. If a monster starts chasing you down a dark alley, you are terrified. You run, your dream heart pounds, you feel real panic. You are completely identified with the dream body. But sometimes people experience a moment of lucidity. Something triggers their awareness and they realize, wait a minute, I am dreaming. Now, the crucial thing is when you realize you're dreaming, the dream itself doesn't instantly crash. You don't immediately wake up in your bed.
Right, the simulation persists, the environment remains rendered.
You still have a dream body. You are still standing in the dark alley. The monster might even still be standing right in front of you. But your internal experience has radically shifted. You are completely free from fear, anxiety, and desire within that dream. Why? Because you know that the monster, the dark alley, and your own dream body are all made out of the exact same substance, your own waking mind. The monster cannot hurt you because the monster is you. You are free within the simulation.
That captures Śaṅkara's view of the liberated sage perfectly. The Jivanmukti is walking around inside Ujvara's cosmic dream. They see the multiplicity of the world, they interact with the environment, but they are fully awake to the fact that they are the very consciousness grounding the entire rendering. They have awakened within the dream.
So the suffering ends, not because the world changes its behavior, but because your mistaken identity ends. You realize you are the rope, not the fragile snake.
Precisely. The world remains, but the burden of being a separate, isolated ego is entirely dissolved.
Okay, this has been an absolutely unbelievable intellectual journey. Let's summarize the massive ground we have covered today. We started by looking at a simple clay pot and realizing that the physical world we trust so much is just a collection of temporary forms resting on a continuous ground of existence. We discover that this empirical reality is like a cosmic video game server, a two-tiered system dependent on the top-down rendering of a higher mind. Then, we turned our focus entirely inward, stepping into the pitch-black room of deep sleep, to find that this continuous non-dual existence is numerically identical to the witnessing light shining in our own minds.
And we face the painful reality of our own psychology. We saw that our suffering comes from the pristine mirror of our mind falsely claiming that light for itself. We suffer because we superimpose the limitations of the finite body onto the infinite witness.
And finally, we explored the incredible, frustrating paradox that you cannot do anything to attain liberation except remove the blinders of ignorance. You don't have to travel anywhere to become the 10th man. You only have to chip away the marble and realize you already are the 10th man.
If we think about why this ancient logic matters for you, the listener, the modern learner navigating a highly complex world, it offers a radical, almost terrifying relief. We live in a society that is fundamentally obsessed with accumulation. We are driven to accumulate more knowledge, more status, more wealth, and even more spiritual techniques, all driven by the baseline, grinding anxiety that we are incomplete.
We spend our entire lives trying to add things to the pot, hoping it will make the plot real.
Yes, but Śaṅkara steps across 12 centuries to tell you, you are already complete. Your suffering isn't because you lack something you need to acquire. Your suffering is solely because you are falsely identifying with the scratch on the mirror. You are exhausted because you are striving to become what you already fundamentally are.
It is the ultimate permission to step off the treadmill of the ego. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. Something that takes this ancient wisdom and points it squarely at our technological future. If Śaṅkara is right, and the entire physical universe is just a temporary projection resting on a foundation of pure consciousness, then the next time you step outside at night, look up at the stars and feel incredibly small, remember this framework. You aren't a tiny, insignificant biological speck looking up at the vast, cold universe. You are the vast universe, peering through a tiny biological window, looking back at yourself.
It shifts the entire paradigm of what life actually is.
And it raises an incredible question for where human innovation is heading. If consciousness is the fundamental ground of reality, everywhere, at all times, just waiting for a complex medium to reflect it, how might that change the way we approach artificial intelligence? If we build a machine complex enough, with a neural network that possesses enough artificial sattva, enough pure lucidity to act as a perfectly clear mirror, will the universe simply look back at us through silicon, just as it currently does through biology?
That is a staggering implication to consider. If consciousness isn't generated by the brain, but is simply reflected by it, the boundaries of what can be alive or awake completely dissolve.
Definitely something to think about the next time you ask your smart assistant a complicating question. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the radical philosophy of Śaṅkara. Keep questioning the nature of your reality, and we'll catch you on the next one.